This slideshow will focus on Reconstruction as it happened and the rise of the Republican Party, as well as the South's response to this rise. So the first thing we're going to talk about are kind of the characters of the people of the Reconstruction era, and they had some names for them. The names for them that the Southern people would call them are carpetbaggers and scalawags. These are not good names. These are insulting names. They called the carpetbaggers. Carpetbaggers are the people that moved from the north into the south during Reconstruction time. The reason they were called carpetbaggers because they were often carrying this carpet style bag, right? So made out of carpet fabric, and in that suitcase was all of their stuff. And so they came down, for a multitude of different reasons. But people in the South were mad at them and called them this nasty name because they thought that these Northerners were coming in to try and take advantage of the really bad situation that the war had left in the South and try to make money for themselves or try to get power for themselves or anything like that. And many of these people came down from the north and they did get political positions. So they did get some of that power, or they were able to start businesses where other people from the south didn't have the money to start those businesses. And so they were able to get that money too. And so, yes, there definitely was some bad stuff going on from these carpetbaggers. There was definitely corruption and stuff like that. Other people came down to start their own businesses, and so you could call that taking advantage of the South as well. But honestly, some of the people that came down were all they wanted was to try to help. Okay, there were many school teachers that came from the North into the South to try and help educate African Americans, people that wanted to come down and try and help rebuild the infrastructure. So a lot of these people were trying to help and trying to build it up and not necessarily just get themselves money or power. All right, the second group, which was maybe even more hated, were the Scalawags. And Scalawags is interesting. It's an old Scots-Irish term for a worthless animal. Okay, and these Scalawags were the Southerners who were on the side of Reconstruction. They worked with the Republicans. They supported Reconstruction. And, there were a lot of different people that fit into this group. Many of them were Whigs before, and when the Whig Party died, they kind of had joined the Democratic Party because there was nowhere else to go. And if you're not in the Democratic Party in the South at this point, you basically had no chance of winning, so you kind of had to go over there. Another group of people who were Scalawags that supported the Reconstruction were generally the poorer owners of small farms, so not the big rich plantation owners, but the other farm owners, because they wanted to keep, or they wanted the power to go to themselves. They didn't want the big plantation owners to get that power back and have the big rich plantation owners continue to run the South and make decisions for them. Okay, and then last but not least, the business owners. Some of the business owners just liked the Republican plan for developing the South's economy. They liked the idea of having this powerhouse economy like the North with trains and telegraphs and factories galore and all that kind of stuff. And so they thought, well, these people might know what they're doing, so let's go ahead and support them and hope that our businesses have a new place with more ability to grow and more ability to make money. So now we'll talk a little bit about Republicanism in the South and how it started to grow. First off, African Americans were a big part of the growth in the Republican Party in the South. And they started to get really involved in politics. The 15th Amendment brought all of them in and allowed them to take an active role because now they could vote. Now they could be part of the government. They could do those things. At first, the leaders of this movement were kind of the educated people that were educated before the war from the North. So artisans and skilled workers up there, as well as ministers who would have congregations, be the religious leaders. Those were the people who really had the power and knew what was going on. And so they came down into the South and they gave speeches to the former slaves, trying to draw them into politics, to make them understand what politics were all about, and to get them onto the side that they agreed with the Republican Party, right? And many people very, very quickly, within like a generation, or even during their lifetime, they went from being slaves at the beginning of their life to, in the middle of their life, being legislators, people that make laws, and administrators, people that enforce the laws. And they were on basically every level of governments. There were black mayors, police chiefs, commissioner of the state legislature, school commissioner, even all the way up to Congress, National Congress. There were tons of African Americans involved in the government during this time. Okay, why did they gain the power? Now, a lot of Democrats at the time would argue that it was black Republicans. So essentially, the black vote was the only thing that put these people in power. But that's just not true. What ended up happening is white Southerners, like the poor farmers who didn't want the plantation owners to get their power back, supported the Republicans, and that was a really, really big group of people who were supporting the Republicans. And then the African Americans did join that Republican group, and those two groups together were able to gain that power for the Republicans in the South. And really, with that power, they were able to do a lot of stuff. They got rid of some of those black codes that were happening, that were making near slavery, out of just changing everything up, and making it into this idea of slavery happening. Like it went from actual slavery to exploitation and stuff like that, which was just as bad as slavery, essentially making them powerless to the white man again. Okay, they also built up infrastructure like hospitals, roads, railroads, bridges, public schools. All of these things were built during this time by the Republicans in the South, as they were trying to build back up those communities that had been torn apart by the war. Okay. A big problem, though, there was a problem. I guess I shouldn't say it was a big problem, because a lot of Republicans did want to help out, but there were some corrupt Republicans, and there was a problem with graft. Okay, and graft, the definition of graft is just gaining money illegally during politics. So you're doing something like taking bribes from somebody or whatever. You're getting a bribe as a politician. And now this was common in the South, but it was also common in the North at this time. It's just not something that they talked about. And so the Democrats were able to use this to later get power. They said, oh, look at this. The Republicans are in charge, and look at all this graft and corruption and bribes and all that kind of stuff. So just some of the regular life things that were happening at this time for the African Americans and their society. African American church, the church was really the center of the community. It was a place where people went for education, where people went for political events and social events. There were festivals and fairs, and this was like the main part of their life. This was all of their, the social aspect of their life almost all happened at the church. That's where they would get together. And also, they kind of acted as unofficial courts. So if there were disputes between a couple of people, they would hear what each side had to say, and then they would discipline people as well. And so they kind of got to act as mini courts when a full-fledged court wasn't necessary. All right. Education is another thing. There was a really strong desire by African Americans for education, to learn how to read, to learn how to do math, to learn how to do all of these things. And so schools, like we talked about before, were first established by the Freedmen's Bureau, and then it went over to these Republican governments, and these Republican governments really started to build up the education system. By 1870, there were 4,000 schools in the South with about 9,000 teachers, about half of them African American, and they were teaching these former slaves. They taught about 200,000 of the former slaves, and then by 1876, just 6 years later, 40% of the African American children were attending school. And these Republican governments not only did that, but they built up an entire public education system in the South that benefited both white and black alike. Okay, and then also several academies were made that grew into African American colleges and universities, kind of focusing on African American people, African American leaders, teaching other African American people to be leaders and do these things and be well educated in life. Take a moment to write out the answer to checkpoint 1. So all of this reform and all of these things happening really made a lot of the people of the South very angry. A lot of the people in the South, a lot of Southerners hated this black Republican, they called it, government that the North had, again, quote, forced onto them. Okay, they didn't like it. They felt like they had no say in it, and so they were not very happy about it. And so some people went to extremes and created secret societies that they set up to terrorize African Americans, as well as white people who were supporting the Reconstruction efforts. Okay, the most famous of these, the largest group was the Ku Klux Klan, and the Ku Klux Klan was started by a former Confederate soldier, a bunch of former Confederate soldiers in 1866. Okay, and they were started with 3 goals in mind. Of course, to terrorize all these people, but how were they going to do this? Number one, they wanted to drive out the Northern reformers, the people who came from the North and were trying to change things. They wanted to get rid of them. Secondly, they wanted to do anything that they could to keep these African Americans away from voting or from being active in the government in any way. And then lastly, they wanted to get back control of the South for white people and the Democratic Party. And so there were many ways that they went about trying to do this, and that they also tried to strike terror in the hearts of these people, which would which would help them to accomplish their goals, they thought. So a little bit more about the Ku Klux Klan and what they did. The Ku Klux Klan would put on their hoods and their white robes, and they would ride out to achieve those goals that we talked about through terror. And so they would go in with their weapons, with their horses, ride in and threaten violence and break up these Republican meetings, any meeting of Republicans. Okay, and then they also would go to the Freedmen's Bureau's homes or offices or whatever, and they would drive the officials out of towns with threats of violence and sometimes actual violence. They would go to African Americans' homes, schools, churches. They would light them on fire and burn them to the ground. Also, they would do anything they could to try to keep African Americans from voting, whether that was actual violence or intimidation or, just being at the polls and not allowing people to go into them to actually vote. And so this became so bad that some Republicans and African Americans, they created militias to fight back against the Ku Klux Klan, and now we're back to all-out violence happening across the South. Okay, so we're heading down a road that we've already been down, that we know doesn't end well. And so the African Americans petitioned to Congress, and they asked for help. And just a little piece of their petition to Congress, they said, "We believe you are not familiar with the description of the Ku Klux Klans riding nightly over the country, going from county to county and in the county towns spreading terror wherever they go by robbing, whipping, ravishing, and killing our people without provocation, compelling colored people to break the ice and bathe in the chilly waters of the Kentucky River. We pray you will take some steps to remedy these evils," saying, Congress, if you actually know this stuff, you're horrible, right? So you must not know all the stuff that's happening, but here's what's happening. You need to step in and fix it for us, your citizens, right? African Americans are now your citizens, and you need to take action against this terror group who's going against some of your citizens. So how did the government respond to the Ku Klux Klan? What they did is President Ulysses S. Grant and the Congress were very angry. They were outraged by all of these actions. They thought it was completely wrong, and so they knew they had to act on it. And so Grant and Congress put together 3 enforcement acts. The 3 enforcement acts, the first one stated that it is a federal crime, no matter what, to interfere with the citizen's right to vote. So if you mess up a person's ability and right to vote, that is against the law, and you can be put into prison for that. Federal crime, a big deal. Guys, the second act said that any federal elections needed to be supervised by federal marshals. So we think of these as kind of police, all right? So they're going to be supervised by these people who are going to make sure that everything is done the right way and done fairly. And the third act, known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, essentially outlawed all of the activities of the Klan and made it illegal to be a member of the Klan. It made the Ku Klux Klan illegal. All right, and that did a lot to stop it. It did help out quite a bit, but obviously it has not fully helped out because there are still Ku Klux Klan members today in modern times. But during Reconstruction, during this time, more than 3,000 Klan members were arrested. However, because they were tried by juries of their peers, many Southern juries, being racist also themselves, did not convict them, and so only about 600 of the 3,000, about 1/5, 20%, were actually convicted of the crimes that they were arrested for, and less even than that actually served any time in prison for the crimes that they committed. Take a moment to write out 3 questions that you have from the notes so far. If you don't have any questions, then create 3 test questions that you might see on a quiz or a test from this material.